Our first speaker this morning is Mikala. Mikala is a director of the 4A Centre for Contemporary Asian Art and a curator, researcher and academic specialising in contemporary Asian art and Australian design. Over the past decade, she has collaborated with local, national and international organisations to strengthen ties between Australia and Asia. As an academic, Mikala has taught at both RMIT and the University of Melbourne in both undergraduate and graduate programs in contemporary art, modernism and exhibition management. More recently, Mikala was the founder and director of Supergraph, Australia's contemporary graphic art fair, which has been held twice since at the Royal Exhibition Centre in Melbourne and exhibited at Somerset House in London. Without further ado, please welcome Mikala to the lectern.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's always exciting to talk about the role of the image, and I think for people like myself who are in the business of the art object, the digital image has proven to be something that has shifted the way that we've had to work over the last few years. So it's really great talking about this. It's not necessarily about what we do every day, but it's an underpinning about how we are working and how we're going to continue to be working over the next few years. This is an image. I thought I'd sort of begin with an explanation of, what a curator is and how we work with images and how we work with objects. For us, the idea of the art object is something that we have trained for many, many years. We complete research, we hang out with books. If you think about the concept of what a curator is, it's usually someone of this kind of figure. And I particularly like this image because she's got a hashtag Ask a Curator. It's from the Getty Centre's Ask a Curator Day, when for just one day you can tweet them questions, which is quite an interesting prospect in terms of access and ideas about people that are doing the research and doing these ideas. But the curator is traditionally seen as someone who works in a museum or a gallery, which is what I do, and you're the keeper and the custodian of the art object. It's not actually about the image per se in terms of digital image, it's about an actual physical object. We complete years of research, years of training with the idea that we are developing what is sort of seen as called the eye, or a connoisseurship, or an understanding of where things come from, why they're important, and this development of taste. So people such as curators are seen as pulling things into a context, telling a story, and really contextualising and building this story from a long understanding of ideas, objects, and how they fit into telling, whether it's a story about this local context, wider context, or rupturing contexts. It really is a long-term research project. So images like Karen here, or this image of Graham Hogg from the National Library of Scotland is another typical idea of what people think about when I used to tell them at university that I was training to be a curator, was the white gloves. We handle objects. It's this really one-to-one moment, solitary research that goes until you can sort of expose it in an exhibition. So it's a long-term kind of relationship, which I think has been really sort of untangled or complicated with the rise of the digital image. And I think I was just reading the white paper a few days ago, and there's stats in there about the impact this has had on the artist, so the object maker. 90%, I think it was, say, 89%, almost 90%, say that this really influences in terms of their exposure, but they're not sure whether this has had some sort of infringement problem. So this digital image and how it works with the artist and how it makes our role as a curator shift has been something that we're all negotiating. There's no current answer at the moment. It's this really interesting playing field. We're trying to figure out where we live. And for the curator, the biggest issue or the biggest conundrum has been the shift in understanding about what we do. I used to always say that I was a curator before, and people would be like, yeah, but what's that? What does that actually mean? It wasn't something that was well known. There was a brief period when the Da Vinci Code came out and people were like, oh, so you look at symbols and you uncover sort of mysteries. I'm like, sure, but they're not quite that exciting. And then in the last few years, it has completely shifted with the rise of Instagram, Pinterest, which is mainly what I'm going to look at today, but this digital platforms where they ask you to curate yourself, or you can begin to curate a visual story through visual images of what you think. So it's shifted from being something that's researched, and you can see here images from Tang, which is an amazing show you can see upstairs in the lunch today. This idea about really looking at something that's historically far away, you're pulling things out, you're recontextualizing, you're putting them in vitrines. It's a very clean space where access between the person, only person who has access to them one-on-one is the curator. And this is all starting to shift. So what does this mean? Thought I would just quickly show the difference between somewhere like Art Gallery of New South Wales and what we do at 4A, because even though we're vastly different, here we have nothing in vitrines. You can actually take these postcards away. This is our current exhibition of Filipino artist Pio Abad. But we're still talking about images, and these digital reproductions, for me, they show the exhibition, but they don't really show the experience of the exhibition. Same with the Tang. You can see this here, you can understand what it looks like, but you don't really know. So I think as museum and gallery administrators, one of our biggest challenges with the digital image before we even get to curation is how much we actually share. So this is a discussion that we have. I mean, obviously they haven't discussed this with these artists, but we discussed this at length with Pio about what images can we show? What images do we release on social media? And if you do have a look at any of our social media accounts, we only show snippets. So we don't want to reveal the entire exhibition until you're physically in the space. So that is a decision-making process about how much we actually share or make available as a digital image, because, you know, as Roland Barthes says in the 1980s, death of the author. Once that image is out there, it is repinned, shared, and goes to numerous places that we can't control. So it is a sort of interesting discussion that we have about just sort of media and marketing social media images. But back to the idea of the curator, I thought I would begin this sort of discussion with the idea of how Pinterest works. Pinterest has become probably one of the biggest tools of the visual arts, but also one of our biggest challenges. For me, this is actually a selection of my current homepage, or was a few days ago when I opened it up. You can see what my friends have currently pinned, what things I've obviously been looking at, I don't know, cactuses or something, so it's pulling out other people's visions of cacti. But also we use these, I've got secret boards that we use across our organisation. When we're looking at exhibitions, people will start to actually pin from Pinterest into that as an image bank for us to begin our discussions about exhibition programming. But also it's a way that these images can be shared by anybody. It doesn't cost anything to start this account. And from March 2010, Pinterest has really changed the way that the image has been collected. So previously you can share images, but this is a way that you can collect your images and display them. And the effect that this has had, I think, on museums and galleries has been huge. And you can kind of see this over the course of museum developments in terms of their websites, which I'll come to in a second. So to start off this discussion, I thought, let's have a look at what's actually on Pinterest. So you put in art, and this is the first 5 things that come up when I put in art, which I find quite interesting. So clearly, as a connoisseur, there is no taste making going on here. This is really a collection of works that just pop up with the idea of art like Google does. But I also then get these really interesting, on the top, things that people also search with art, so art projects. There's that really huge DIY idea about the visual image or the digital image of artworks, encouraging creativity, but also Disney, which is concerning. That one of the biggest things you think about with art is also Disney, but drawings, abstract, and street. So, themes that are coming out in terms of what this whole conglomerate of these millions of users are looking at when they're thinking about the digital image and art and how they're collecting their images. I then started looking at art and pinners, and this is when things started to get interesting. So a pinner is someone who says to themselves, brands themselves. So Art Fido, which is actually an Australian-based online auction platform, they've started a board where they collect what they're showing as art. So tastemakers. You've also got Nicholas Forrest, who's a big media person in the Australian art world, and also Saatchi, clearly international, global tastemaker. Got a whole team of curators. This is what they are saying is art. So you can also go through and sort of find a tastemaker that you want to follow and follow those boards and see what they're saying is art. So these people are hugely influential, but again, they're collecting digital images, but not the object. So we're still seeing this sort of split between the object and the image. Saatchi's really interesting. He's got 68,000 followers, which, is good, but it's not huge. But it's still one of the leading people within this sort of art section. And then you have something like Goop, which I'm not sure if you know, it's Gwyneth Paltrow's lifestyle blog. And I think I've chosen her, you could choose a multitude of people to sort of examine how this shift from the curator and the connoisseur to this sort of celebrity influencer, so this new sort of idea of tastemakers that have emerged with this digital age, and their influence on our industry has been immense. So someone like Kim Kardashian you could also look at, but I chose not to. But Gwyneth Paltrow is interesting because she has a weekly EDM where she actually proclaims through her lifestyle blog that this is what she do. So the celebrity has become a really powerful person. They've gone from being somebody on the screen to being on the movie poster for the movie to being in sort of gossipy magazines to taking over the front cover of something like Vogue, where models used to always have that arena, to being littering the whole sort of internet in terms of people.com, Daily Mail, all those sorts of consumable gossip things, to actually owning their own outlets, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, or a newsletter, to get their ideas out. And unlike someone like Saatchi, she's got, I can't even see here, 100, where is it? Can't even see the number. I think I wrote this down. I think she's got something like 103,000 people following her art and design page, which you can see in the bottom left. So these people, even though they have no sort of historical understanding or connoisseurship, or there's no curatorial training, they are becoming these influencers in what is called an art and design. If you start talking, or we sit down in meetings, in previous roles that I've worked at in small organisations, there is always this idea of we should get some kind of influencer to work with us to promote what we're seeing here today. So these people have become extremely important in terms of how the digital image creates value and reach. People work with these people because if they Instagram something, it goes further. So it's interesting to see which artists or which designers they're working with and how they're treating their image. So here is like a clear shift, and I chose these two images because Gwyneth Paltrow does not have any of these sort of historical ideas of what a curator is. Graham, on the other hand, is really part of that research, that tastemaker, that long-term relationship with the art object, to someone who is talking more about style and aspiration. And these two very powerful ideas of style, aspiration, and sort of image making has meant that there's been a shift in the understanding of the word curator and what that means. And while that shift is happening in sort of the general public, it really has changed the way that we have had to work, or had to sort of describe how we work. If you can see here, this is Gwyneth Paltrow's art and design page, which is really mostly sort of like articles or to-dos, but I find it quite interesting that she's got, Contemporary Art 2.0, a buying guide, because it's, that simple 5 points. But it really, these are the things that these are what people are actually reading. I think, the numbers here, 103,000 followers. This is what they're getting their art information from. So these traditional channels are now not under threat, but we're under the sort of challenge of rethinking about how we connect with our audiences. The digital mediums mean that we have new ways to expand our audiences, but we also have new competition who are much better at explaining themselves. So we've got quite a lot to learn from in terms of these guys in digital imagery. So the idea to curate, anyone that has worked with me know that now and then I have a little bit of a meltdown in the office when I see that some coffee festival, coffee is being curated. It's like, when did the word curate change so much to become this verb, which really is a word for organising or programming or choosing? You don't curate your shopping trolley, you just choose things. So this change in how we understand the word curate has meant that for us, the research aspect of it and trying to explain what we do has become more complex. When everyone can drag and drop an image into Pinterest and curate a board, what does that mean for people that are training, or people that work at Art Gallery New South Wales whose knowledge and understanding of the art object is far more simple than a nice image that they've just pulled across? So how does this work? So this kind of challenge is what we're looking at. We've gone forward one. We're looking at dealing with at the moment. This image here, I just thought I would just show one of PO in terms of how we've used this as a great tool in terms of how people, or the general audience and general public, are reacting to artists that we work with. So P.O. Barter is the artist we've currently got on display. I looked him up. This is what comes up. You can clearly see here that there are snippets of his works. There's only a few scarves that you can see in full bleed that he's already sold. But also you got to see what people are putting things on. I think you can't quite see in this from your distance, but some of the boards that people have added to him are artists that I want to do a show with, or art that intrigues me. So for us, we also saw him being pinned to political things or things about the Philippines. So he's actually the context in which he's sitting in the minds of the general public is quite visible here. So we use this as a tool in which to think about how we're going to reach out to our audiences and how he's currently being collected or being curated in personal collections. It also gives you a really big idea about what is out in the domain as well. So in response to this huge change in the word to curate or to be a curator, the art world has begun, I'll still say that we're still beginning, I think. Becky will talk a bit more about this in the way that digital mediums are helping this sort of exchange between the digital image and the object. But we're still dealing with how do we make this digital image work for us as curators, as arts facilitators, as artists. How do we get that image to direct back to the object? And as you can see here, places like Society 6, which is an online store, they are starting to do things where there's a similar sort of search function and a similar layout to something like Pinterest, where you start to see images being pulled together for sale. So they're trying to drive through the same sort of setup sales of actual artworks. What's really interesting about them is they also have this very catchy ad on their page, Find Art, Share Art, Get Paid, where you can become a Society 6 curator. And if you pull together images from their boards onto your own, very similar to what you do on Pinterest, and then you publicise it, if anyone buys it from your collection, your curated collection, you get a payment. So the everyday curator, the person on the street, suddenly can push what they're doing on Pinterest as a hobby they do on their iPad while they're lounging in bed to a money-making scheme or curatorial sort of profession. However, they only pay like $1.20 for commissions, which is interesting. But it is this idea of, how is the art world responding to this visual image? How do we actually make this work for us? These activities, and I think it's easy to say that the visual image and the digital image is making the engagement with art and the art image much broader than it ever has been. But how do we bring this back? So these are sort of first ways that people are beginning to do this. The other online, another one, there's numerous online platforms for digital images, but I find Sedition, who've been around for quite a few years now, to be one of the most interesting. So this is the beginning of their website, and this is their slogan. So collect art for the digital age. So original art for your compare in the business of selling famous artists' digital images, which you can download, and you get an edition. They only sell 100 of them, and it's encrypted, so you can only use it. You can't sort of keep sharing it. So you can buy for your TV for $21 a Damien Hirst. So when you go home at night, you can put your TV on. When you've got it off, it becomes a living sort of digital artwork. So here you've got people, or the art world, responding by, okay, so people aren't interested in collecting the object. Maybe then we'll actually make the digital image available, and that can be your collection. So you can collect everything on there. Artists have made work specifically for this platform, which is quite interesting. I actually haven't met anybody that's got one yet, but you always think $21, that's okay. Then you've got something like Paddle 8. Paddle 8, I think, would have to be the most successful version so far. They actually have just shifted their business plan this year to be a bit more global. They're making huge inroads into Asia, and they've started to work. They worked with us last year for our fundraising exhibition. They're working with IMA in Brisbane. But basically, they have responded to this idea of the influencer and the curator, and they've tried to merge them. So they're an online auction platform. There's been numerous online auction platforms that have failed over the last few years, because how do you get people to drive to them? Sotheby's, Christie's, these are big names that have been around for years. But something like Paddle 8, this new platform, how do they really engage their new public? So what they've done is that with their auctions, they only auction from places that have kudos already. So they will auction a private collection of a house, and it'll be a collector's house. They may be anonymous, or they may have their name stated. So you're buying something from the collection of. So they're using that kind of curated collection as a means in which to get business. They work with places like us or IMA, so you get our following to have a look. We curate a collection for our fundraiser exhibition. You can buy from that. So you've had researchers and curators bringing together art objects that become these images online, which is really easy to sort of slide through and choose. You can see here, so this is a current exhibition. Big names, Kusama, Hockney. And then when you click onto it, again, it has that same look of Pinterest, of the dropping down images. You can pin these, you can drag and drop. You've got a very nice price range sort of toggle, and you can search. But here they're starting to combine the idea of the researcher and the curator in the traditional role with this new everyday curator and how they can work and how they want to buy online. So it's a really quite an interesting model that I think we should be watching over the next few years. Then we have the museum. So I think this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated. It's been quite easy, and historically the art market tends to adapt to these shifts much faster than the rest of us. They will begin to find ways, entrepreneurial ways in which to make $1.20 to convert this new everyday curator who's very, very happy with the digital image and how to pull them back to the actual physical image. But for the museums and for the galleries such as us, it poses lots and lots of questions. We're currently doing a website redevelopment. Most of my colleagues in the small to medium contemporary art organisations across Australia are also in that process of recalibrating our websites to be more image heavy, to kind of have these, let's go back so you can see, these sorts of big bars of images. You'll start to see this when you go into any sort of major museum or gallery website. It's really about this sort of full imagery and then breaking down to small things like this. And the reason is because museums are catching up in trying to cater to a general public that is extremely savvy and engaged with the digital image. We're preaching or we're talking to audiences that completely understand this, if not more so than ourselves. So while we're trying to look after the actual art object and find an image that reflects that, the general public is already very wise as to how to use this digital image. I mean, we're constantly within meetings in our team talking about, oh yeah, we posted that image, we thought it would be really great because it shows, the intricacy of the artwork. And then we'll show a very sort of designy snap we think is good, but it's not really showing the great aspects of the artwork, and that one will be the one that travels and has the furthest reach. So we're in this process of learning about how these images work. And places like bigger museums such as here or Harvard Art Museums are faced with the question of how much of your collection do you digitalise, and then how much do you make available for the general public? Are we entering the age when people can drag and drop images from the collection of the Art Gallery of New South Wales before they arrive, and then maybe in the future print off a map that tells them where to go? Are we in an age where you can actually experience the collection, or your engagement with the collection of one of our big state museums only happens at home? I think this is our biggest concern as museum administrators, is the idea that if we get so good at this digital image, and if the general public is so great at consuming the digital image, are we moving further and further away from the actual art object? And that, for me, is sort of quite disturbing, because the encounter that you have with an art object within its physicality, within an exhibition space, is the curated experience. It's about lighting, it's about that moment of entering a space. I mean, Tang does it really interestingly in terms of new technology with the iPads that you look up. I'm not sure if you've all done that yet, but you definitely should. And you can hold an iPad up to these dots on the wall, and you see this tomb come alive that you can then explore by digital technology and your own movement. But that's still a physical engagement. And it is not something that you can get from sitting at home on your couch and just swiping. So ideas like audiobooks or audiobooks that work with digital collections that encourage you to walk or still encounter the works are really important. I think you can see how they're sitting up against places like the Louvre, who are doing these amazing virtual tours. I mean, the virtual tour of the Hermitage Museum online is unparalleled. I've never been there, but I kind of feel like I have. And by giving me that experience, is that really cannibalizing our physical audience? How do we still convince the audience that they need to come into the space? And I don't think we've really figured that out yet. We're still struggling with the idea that people can or should be able to consume both. So I think you'll see over the next few years with the digitalizations of collections, how they're actually curated as pockets to come up. So if you look now, I think I didn't actually put a slide up of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, but definitely at the NGB in Melbourne. You can look up Asian art and they'll have a curated digital collection of images. Not the whole collection, just a few. So I think that is a really interesting idea about how much access we give. Somewhere here like Harvard Art Museum, I think they've clearly made the digital image as a clear entry point to their collection. Visit. So under visit, I expect they've got exhibitions, but next to that is browse our collection. You've got then in the search bar, this real push to be keyword, title, artist, object number, or gallery number. That's a huge amount of information. That means you can go into the gallery, take the object number, come home and look it up for further information. But you can also be like cats, and we'll go from there. And I think that's a really interesting idea because that's come from the internet. That's come from our digital tagging or hashtagging of images is now being reflected back into how collections are actually organised. We're moving away from this old sort of idea of cataloguing, and I can remember for years when I first started working, I had to catalogue for months one artist's work at the NGB, and that was about this sort of where does it sit in terms of watermarks and this. And now we're talking about this hashtag that is coming into the vernacular of actually our profession as well as a digital image online. But they've also got things like technique and medium. So we're pushing again towards the art object. What actually is this physicality about as opposed to just period, place or culture or gallery is it in? So we're actually asking you to push. So I think Harvard Art Museum is subtly beginning to reflect on this. One of my second last slides, which I found really interesting when I started to Google, what galleries are responding to this and how they're responding. This is a gallery in Lincoln in the UK where they have used BuzzFeed. Out of all the online sources to use, BuzzFeed was an interesting choice to ask people to vote for the top 50 artworks in their collection, which they then hung. And you can see on the left, if there was a curator involved, that would never have happened. That kind of hang is just not, it's just not working. So how much do you give over to this general public? It's really great at the drag and drop, but it's really clear they're not curators. So it's a negotiation that we're going through in terms of how we work or how we invite and involve our general audiences, but how do we bring them back to the art object? I think there's some other articles I read where they said they had so much more attendance because people had this sort of connection to the collection because they had been involved in it. So the museums are in this, how do we negotiate how to get this sort of involvement and activity and long-term connection with the collection, which is what we're all sort of charged to do, but we don't want to end up like this. So it's this interesting moment. It's going to end on one image from us and then one sort of larger scale image about sort of a concern. I think it's a bigger conundrum. And when I began looking at this talk and how to talk about the visual image, I started looking back at documentation from our exhibitions. This is the show we did last year for Yanjiang Group, who are a Southern Chinese trio of mischief makers. They take calligraphy and they challenge the idea of what calligraphy is today, how we should be thinking about it, and the sort of sanctity of the image. So if you think about how Tang shows calligraphy and you think about how we show calligraphy, it's a completely different spot on the spectrum, but it's still an engagement with a long-term art practice. And here you can see people in there, which gives you an idea of scale, but you really don't understand or have any engagement or experience of this artwork until you are there with the flapping of the paper that the fans are moving and the movement of these. We had beach balls that were sort of rolling on top of everything. And that experience in the gallery is lost through the visual image. Yes, these documentation photographs are great, but it is not a substitute for that experience. So I think our biggest challenge will be that, and I think this is an artwork that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Marina Abramovich, the artist, is present, where she asked people to come and sit eyeball to eyeball with her for 15 minutes in the gallery space. No talking, no gestures, just a eye contact engagement. That kind of physicality or bodily experience between art object is something that we need to ensure that we can funnel the digital image back to, because you can see here, even through the digital image, the kind of poignant moment or the intensity of this experience, that when you put the same search title into Pinterest, suddenly loses its effect. Yes, other people are collecting this and curating this into their understanding of the image, but the real sort of power to her performance or her work as an artist is lost. So when we're talking about the visual image and its future and its role, I think as art, museum, gallery, and our role as curators, it's really to harness the everyday curator or harness digital image, but to always bring them back to the actual art object, because that is what we're in the business of doing. So, thank you.